Good morning. Oh, almost too far. Hello. Good morning. Welcome to what am I doing? Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Hope you're doing well today. Hi. Hello. Hi. How are you? It's laundry day. Baron. It's hot out there today. No coffee. Too much coffee for me today already, so I'm drinking lemon water. I like that LaCroix stuff. LaCroix. Looks like LaCroix. LaCroix. You can buy it in the supermarket. It's like this sparkling water. I don't know if they have it over in Europe, but in the U.S. it's like this new thing. It's cheap, and refreshing, crisp. I like the lemon. And then I put lemon in the lemon. It's a great low-calorie option for hydration. I should probably just put lemon in regular water and do the same thing, but I don't know. Something about that fizz. Dad fizz. Today's book is a long time coming, recommended for months and months and months way back. I can't even remember on this channel. It is Thomas Bernhard's The Loser. Le Hugh the Her. If you don't get that, I'm sorry. That was part of my childhood, man. I mean, like, I was reciting Jim Carrey lines. I think one of my earliest memories was, like, embarrassing the hell out of my aunt in a McDonald's because I had just seen Ace Ventura. And I was, like, 4. And was just quoting and doing impersonations of all the stupid shit in that film. Jim Carrey is amazing. So, yes, today I'm feeling the burn of Austrian satirist Thomas Bernhard. I wish I could remember who recommended The Loser first. I'm sure it was back in the Conspiracy Against the Human Race days. I bet that probably led onto this recommendation, but it took me a while, obviously, to get around to it, but I'm very, very glad I did. Thomas Bernhard, who passed away at the age of 58 in the year I was born, 1989, was an extremely prolific Austrian novelist and I think a playwright, and he had something like over 40 published novels or something astounding, and was a huge critic of the country that he was writing in, and was so loved and also so hated. You know, loved and hated to the degree where old women, it is said, would attack him on buses with their umbrellas. I am not joking, and that made my day when I read about that. A man who is very familiar with suicide. His father, it is said, committed it, and Bernhard never knew him. I bring this up because it is the main theme of this fantastic novel from 1983, The Loser. I figured I would keep the biography bit about him kind of short because, after reading this, I'm definitely going to revisit the rest of his works, and I think it's fair to assume that I'm probably going to review more of Bernhard on this channel. He's magnificent. Big surprise with me, you guys obviously know what I like, and so y'all keep recommending great stuff, which is why I love the comments section. You can recommend stuff below. I try and read all of the comments as much as I can and respond to as many as I can, but, things get out of hand, man. Things are blowing up all over the fucking world. This week, what the... Man, I was just in Nice. I was where those people were. That was in front of the place I was staying. Yeah, I have a really good feeling I'm going to revisit him in the years to come. I really enjoyed this. And I really mean enjoy. I know I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. It seems dark, and it's like, why the hell would you enjoy something like this? It's all about suicide. But, we will get to it. It is satire. I want to keep reminding everybody that. For y'all nihilists, y'all pessimists, y'all fatalistic motherfuckers, you are all about to blow your self-pitying cry for helping load on this one. Trust me. Nothing matters, and it's fabulous. Now, if you were a huge fan of Fernando Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet, which I certainly was, this one is next on the list for you. Should be right up there. It is bleak as hell satire, certainly in the vein of anything by Welbeck or Chiron. Chiron, Ciron, tu sais pas quoi, j'ai la parfaite prononciation. Prononciation. Je m'en fous, mon ami. Bisous. Don DeLillo, author I just reviewed, his book Underworld was fantastic, said it like thus. It has to be understood that Bernhard himself writes a prose so unrelenting in its intensity toward a fixed idea that it sometimes approaches a level of self-destructive delirium. He is frequently funny at this level, and that is very true. So, for this novel, it is fiction. It's this really magnificent setup, right? The narrator and his friend Wertheimer are studying at this place called the Mozarteum in Salzburg. Seems like this really prestigious music school. And they're both studying to be these piano virtuosos, these masters. So immediately you have this excellent atmosphere, very sterile, very stiff, very cold, kind of glacial, Michael Haneke, poker-faced students who are masking these intense feelings and emotions of jealousy and all this insecurity, and they're not really revealing anything. And these kind of like limp-wristed bourgeois kids who are like tearing themselves apart on the inside with all these neuroses. You have that environment, and then the narrator and Wertheimer's friend meet the American-Canadian piano prodigy, Glenn Gould, and they realize it's over. Because in comparison, they'll never be as good. Ever. Right after they hear the Goldberg variations, they realize, both of them, but particularly Wertheimer, they will never be good. Thomas, it seems, was a fan of Glenn Gould, who was very famous for the Goldberg variations by Bach. They're beyond legendary, but I knew nothing about Glenn Gould before this. I have since learned quite a bit. I didn't know who he was or what he was responsible for, or that he played piano even. I was very behind on this one, which was surprising to me because I love a lot of pianists, and I'm a guy who likes shit like Schoenberg and Eric Satie, so it's surprising to me. But I was very happy, more information, it's good. This one definitely escaped me, so listen up, all of you young people. Glenn Gould was an extraordinary piano player of the mid-20th century. An eccentric genius, a lonely god amongst mere mortal musicians. His perfect pitch allowed for this rapid development and prodigious ability to play, mostly Bach from what I gather, unlike anyone else. When you think about it, it sounds like this kind of like timid, meek, or very isolated, lonely sort of figure, but you'd be wrong. What I mean to say is you might think his handshake was a little bit soft, if you get my drift. No. You ought to listen to this off-the-record documentary behind the scenes with him in his small little country house by this lake north of Toronto, where he basically went to just go and do his own thing, hang out with his dog, didn't really have, a girlfriend or a wife around, was very, very, very intent on just playing. But in this documentary, it's incredible. He's like this borderline charismatic individual. He seems like this very real, grounded, strong, insightful personality. And this is him at 27. He looks like he's like 40. It's great. The sequence around minute 23 or so where Gould is playing the piano, kind of just like rocking back and forth in this state of like ecstasy, is incredible. He always sang when he played. He was actually unable to control himself, apparently. And there he is, with his eyes closed, like sitting and just humming the, the Bach. And you can actually hear this on the Goldberg variation recordings. And it's incredibly iconic. So why so much Glenn Gould? Is it about Glenn Gould? Well, kind of like yes and no. To me, that sounds like sort of a cop-out answer, but trust me, it's far more interesting. Thomas Bernhard never met Glenn Gould. Except maybe when Gould played in Austria one time, but I mean, it's a real stretch. So basically, let's assume that Thomas Bernhard just never met Glenn Gould and then read the novel. What I gather is that the novel is this very painful confession of the guilt this man feels for the suicide of his friend that he thinks he may have been able to prevent. That there was a possibility of preventing his friend from coming to this horrifically tragic end. He clearly feels very guilty. This is not to say that you will feel this way necessarily, right? Amongst the intellectual assault on Austria, the music culture, the world itself, it's all kind of wrapped up to make you think it would be something about something else, you know, that to think that it's otherwise. The constant complaining and the self-pitying and the critique of the constant complaining and self-pitying of his friend. I mean, this, you know, like, it's almost like criticizing yourself in the mirror at points for this guy. Thomas is very good at making you think that this is actually his point of view that is being said through the character's mouth. You know, you could easily assume that. And I think that would be a mistake, but it's very clever how he plays this. You know, he always like gives this piece of almost aphoristic nihilism or pessimism and ends it with like, I thought he thought, or I thought he thought, you know. And it is all one long, and it's notorious for being sort of this one long monologue. It's no, you know, no breaks or paragraphs really. You know, the grammar is kind of a little bit wonky, and there's no chapters. You know, there's no stopping. It's just this relentless internal thought, which I really enjoy personally. I love stuff like that, and it's only 300 pages. It'll take you just like, you could probably actually read it in one day, which would be fine. It's really, it's a great long afternoon read. I want to emphasize that, just like DeLillo was saying, you know, just like all of the best fatalistic or seemingly nihilistic or whatever, the satirists, the guys with the really dark points of view, the really true dark points of view, he has a fantastically rich sense of humor, and that's what makes the novel work, in my opinion, the sense of humor. And it is also an extremely touching book. As sappy and sentimental as that sounds, it really is. Not quite as puzzlingly internal and Borgesian as the mind of Pessoa. A little more muscle, a little rougher, even like a little sexier, I would say. Though it concerns three men who were almost devoutly asexual to the public, but then again, it shows what they were. Some qualities are admirable, some are not. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their history, their bond, and the breaking of that bond. It's about a man who feels guilty that his friend committed suicide because he knew that he could have made an effort to save him, and he didn't. It's a book about giving up. It's a book about failure because you gave up. That's what it's about, in every single way. It's about psyching yourself out of something and the consequences therein. The book is so bitter at the beginning, it shakes you up. It's like, oh my God, who the fuck is this asshole? And then, of course, you quickly realize it's so clever, it's so enthrallingly cold and putrid that it's indebted to stuff like Celine's Journey to the End of the Night that it's just hysterical. We don't know the name of the narrator, but we do know, you know, his friend Wertheimer, and we know that both of these guys wanted to be piano virtuosos. Wertheimer, his friend, hung himself from a tree in front of his sister's house, Wertheimer's sister. It was basically this last guilt trip move to, you know, get revenge or whatever in this really pathetic way on her for leaving him and going and starting her own life and finding a husband and actually living her goddamn life, you know. And he just couldn't take it because, you know, he was this very. It was kind of like this revealing of like these latent incestuous feelings for her or something that he just couldn't take because he was a lonely, poor, rich guy. They were both very wealthy, and he just never bonded with any other human being and was extremely manipulative and kept his sister in the apartment around with him. And when she left it and found her own life in her 40s or whatever, he just couldn't take it, and he hung himself in front of her house. Very pathetic way to go. After Glenn Gould stole his virtuoso career or whatever, she was the last thing that was taken from him, basically, you know. If you would like to spin it that way, because obviously he was never ever going to be as good as Glenn Gould. You see, Glenn Gould, upon meeting him for the first time, nicknamed him the Loser. The Loser is one of Glenn Gould's brilliant inventions, I thought. Glenn just saw through Wertheimer the moment they met. He completely saw through everyone he met for the first time. So Bernhard never met Glenn Gould, but he describes him in great detail, and that is the trait of a magnificent novelist. He makes you think that they spent 30 years together, you know, that they studied together, that they worked, lived, and, you know, shed blood, sweat, and tears together and died together, you know. I'm very happy I didn't know who Glenn Gould was going into this, because that just makes it seem more like the case, you know. That just seems I could believe it all much more, not knowing the myth of the person, the persona of Glenn Gould. I was totally open to being manipulated by Bernhard's narrative. And that's a good thing. That's what you want. I think that's really magnificent that he didn't actually know him. It's totally subversive, write about this character who actually existed like you knew him and convince everybody that you did, right? But the truth is, which again, in the afterword is really nice in this. I definitely recommend checking it out when you're finished. What I discovered was that Bernhard had actually used, the Glenn Gould of the novel is sort of this amalgam of, Bernhard's own life experiences, parts of him, parts of other people, and, the mythos, but then reality as well. All combined to this character, this really magnificent depiction, who is called Glenn Gould in the novel. It all comes from being a fan, I would gather, and it's a fantastic concept. The majority of even the most famous piano players haven't a clue about their art, he said. But it's like that in all arts, I said. Just like that in painting, in literature, I said. Even philosophers are ignorant of philosophy. Most artists are ignorant of their art. They have a dilettante's notion of art, remain stuck all their lives in dilettantism. Even the most famous artists in the world. We understood each other immediately. We were, I have to say it, attracted from the first moment by our differences, which were actually completely opposite in our, of course, identical conception of art. So both the narrator and Wertheimer are driven to the suicide of their artistic ambitions, essentially, after watching Glenn Gould play the Goldberg Variations. Even though, to some extent, they love him. I mean, how could you not? He's incredible, right? It's basically like entering a prestigious film school, and then in the very first class, on the very first day, the fully developed Stanley Kubrick just walks in and sits next to you. You're done for, right? If you're weak. The loser is what Glenn Gould calls Wertheimer to his face. Der Untergeher. Der Untergeher is the German word, and it's darker, as I learned in the wiki summary. It's actually that direct translation is much darker. It means literally the one who goes under, which of course is hideously appropriate in this context, that these two men were sort of driven to feeling suicidal, but one actually went through with it and did commit suicide. A really sick part of the narrative is when the narrator says that basically when he killed himself, when Wertheimer killed himself, that was like the most original thing he had ever done. It was the only thing that had actually set himself apart, and so it's like this cold ice bucket of reality dumped on your soft, warm, sleeping mind. Vicious. We begin as piano virtuosos and then start rummaging about and foraging in the human sciences and philosophy, and finally go to seed. Because we didn't reach the absolute limit and go beyond this limit, I thought. Because we gave up in the face of a genius in our field. But if I'm honest, I could never have become a piano virtuoso, because at bottom I never wanted to be a piano virtuoso, because I always had the greatest misgivings about it and misused my virtuosity at the piano in my deterioration process. Indeed, I always felt from the beginning that piano players were ridiculous. Seduced by my thoroughly remarkable talent at the piano, I drilled it into my piano playing, and then, after 1.5 decades of torture, chased it back out again, abruptly, unscrupulously. It's not my way to sacrifice my existence to sentimentality. I burst into laughter and had the piano brought to the teacher's house and amused myself for days with my own laughter about the piano delivery. That's the truth. I laughed at my piano virtuoso career, which went up in smoke in a single moment. He gives like this wonderful piano to this guy who doesn't deserve it. I don't know, whatever. And probably this piano virtuoso career that I had suddenly tossed aside was a necessary part of my deterioration process, I thought while entering the inn. We try out all possible avenues and then abandon them, abruptly throw decades of work in the garbage can. Giving up. Psyching yourself out. Glenn destroyed our piano virtuosity at a time when we still firmly believed in our piano virtuosity. For years after our Horowitz, the teacher, after our Horowitz course, we believed in our virtuosity, whereas it was dead from the moment we met Glenn. Who knows, if I hadn't gone to Horowitz, whether I would be, whether I wouldn't be a piano virtuoso today. One of those famous ones, as I thought, who shuttled back and forth the whole year between Buenos Aires and Vienna with their art, and Wertheimer as well. Immediately I quashed the idea, for I detested virtuosity with its attendant features from the very beginning. I detested above all appearing before the populace. I absolutely detested the applause. I couldn't stand it. Neither could Glenn Gould. That's actually true. He absolutely could not stand the audience or performing live, which is actually a very interesting part of that documentary. Link in the description box below. You should definitely check it out. It's very fascinating. I couldn't stand it. For years I didn't know. Is it the bad air in concert halls or the applause I can't stand, or both, until I realized that I couldn't stand virtuosity per se, and especially not piano virtuosity, for I absolutely detested the public and everything that I had to do with this public, and therefore I detested the virtuoso and virtuosos personally as well. Now, so much of the book is about thought, this guy's thoughts, because it's this internal monologue that just rambles on and on. But I'm sure, that Bernhard to some degree has done just what the book is about, given up in the face of a genius, been intimidated and just stopped when they've really worked hard on something. He's psyched himself out. He's given up. He's failed, and nobody is responsible for it other than him, of course. Because it is fucking difficult to stare down genius in the face and realize that, I may never be that good. Ever. And you have to come to terms with the fact that you definitely do not have the upper hand in this situation. And you may never. However, this is the finest example in literary fiction that I have ever seen of what happens when you just give up, when you psych yourself out. When you truly give up and abandon your dreams. What is the result? You hate yourself for the rest of your life, and you may end it by your own hands. That's pretty accurate, I would say. That's what I take away, at least. But that's just me. So a word of advice. Before you abandon whatever you've put a shit ton of time into, read The Loser by Thomas Bernhard and make sure you really don't have it in you before you give up. Also, I was listening to that guy Leo at actualized.org, and he's kind of like the self-help dude. I was very interested in this one that he did, this talk he gave about patience. I thought it was pretty cool. You guys ought to go and check it out. It's pretty good. The dude knows what he's talking about, I thought. There are some great talks he does on, the idea of failure and giving up and being patient. All the subjects of today's book. So you should go check it out if you're interested or struggling with that stuff, which I think at some point all of us most certainly will. So check it out. So from what I described, you might think this book is like monstrously depressing. I assure you that is not the case. Our narrator is an asshole, to be sure, but there's obviously some sort of charm in the writing, that comes with the territory. The way he deals with these subjects, the loss of ambition, the hatred of virtuosity, jealousy, loneliness, sadness upon the death of loved ones and knowing you may have been able to make a difference and, not having that anymore. And of course, realizing that you don't want something that you thought you wanted for a very, very, very long time and have been fighting all this way up in your life to get. It's marvelous. And he's not a totally bitter pessimist as as you would expect from the very first pages. You wouldn't really want... I don't think somebody like that would actually write a book like this. I'll tell you something I've noticed that's actually very funny. Within all of these guys with these writers, these authors with these very, 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 very dark points of view, Welbeck or Saline or whatever, there is usually one thing in the novel or the story that they cannot help but just praise to no end. Just these heaping... just give these heaping amounts of lavish praise to. For Saline in Journey to the End of the Night, it was a prostitute in Detroit. And for Bernhard, it is Sintra, Portugal. He left a shitty place in Vienna, which he just detested, and he went to go and stay for a year and try and write something about Glenn Gould in Sintra, Portugal. And Sintra, Portugal is not even of this earth. It's so beautiful, and he apparently agrees. He loved Sintra, and he thought it was one of the most beautiful places on earth. I love Sintra. I know it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. If you're a traveler and you're looking for the places to go before you die, Sintra, Portugal is number one. Number two, maybe Ronda, Spain, for me personally. Sintra has to be one of the most beautiful enthrallingly mysterious places in existence. Lush and dark doesn't begin to describe its beauty. Charming isn't even doing anything justice. It is unlike anywhere else. There are no words to describe it. You just have to go and see it. You have to go explore the cavernous catacombs beneath the dilapidated mansions and go explore the Moorish castle on top of the mountain where you can see the ocean in the distance, all the foliage everywhere and the overgrowth on all the old statues, and so gothic and stunning and pristine, you know. Very few places left like that. Love it. Incredible. Go. It's not the place you visit over the course of a couple of days so much as it is a place where you rent a little cottage or a room somewhere for a month and just watch yourself change. I could talk so much more about this, but I will leave you with the most important thing, which is life is far too short to read bullshit. Nothing matters, and it's fabulous. Check back in next week. Hope you're all doing well. Be safe out there. Seriously. I hope it doesn't get worse, but it's probably going to get worse. So buckle up and be safe. I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one. Ciao.